Hello, Peter4789 says Sirus here, and well, just from the title and video footage, you can probably tell that I'm doing a video on the Yakuza series. What about though? Well, mostly about the Yakuza games that I played this year, which was Yakuza 3 through 7, though I will also go over quickly about what I think about Yakuza 0, Kiwami 1, and Kiwami 2 very quickly at the end, just so you guys know where I stand on all of the mainline Yakuza games. But Yakuza, what can you really say about this gaming series? A lot really when you get down to it. It's a gaming series that has this focus on crime drama stories, that has its own share of charming characters that makes it enjoyable to go through. That is a series that has over-the-top beat-em-up action that's fun to watch and play, for the most part. It's a series of games that has very weird, absurd side stories, and whose tone is pretty different from the main story. That has loads of minigames for you to partake in. Minigames which also include being able to play old Sega arcade games, which is pretty cool. Yakuza is all that and more, and that's honestly why it's so glorious, and why I'm making a video talking about the series. But before I start, I guess I should go over my brief history with the Yakuza games, since this wasn't the year I first tried the games. It was 2017 when I first tried Yakuza 0. At first, I was mostly interested in the game since my friends were all talking about it. But after playing it, I can say I was hooked on the Yakuza series. The cool characters, the beat-em-up action combat system, the heat action, the densely packed cities that were oozing charm and character when you walk through them, the gripping crime drama that revolved around this empty lot, the silly but wholesome sub-stories that you got to experience by doing the side content of the game. I loved it all. After Yakuza 0, I was hooked. Afterwards, I played Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2 as well as Judgment, which is sort of a spin-off, and I thought they were also really good. I could have probably played more of the Yakuza games earlier, but I decided to wait for the remaster of 3 through 5 before playing any more Yakuza games. Mostly because it was more convenient to wait for the games that has all 3 games rather than separately buying 3 games online. I also held off playing Yakuza 6 even though I own it, just because I heard that that's the conclusion of Kiryu's arc. So it only makes sense for me to first play through 3 and then 4 and 5. But lo and behold, the remaster came. I played for 3, 4, 5, and 6 consecutively, and then 7 came out just when I was finishing 6, so I played that right after, so I pretty much played these games back to back. And I'm pretty surprised that I didn't reach burnout on the Yakuza games, considering that they're not really short games. They're not overly long like Persona, but they are still 20 to 30 hours per game, give or take. It's overall been quite a ride, but I guess I should go through each Yakuza games I played this year and just list the highlights and notable gripes I have with each installment. So let's start with Yakuza 3.
Oji-san?
今日の晩飯だ。さあ、そろそろ夕飯の支度をするか。
Now, Yakuza 3 I think is in a unique position, since it's probably gonna feel the most dated Yakuza game that most people are gonna play now, just due to how Yakuza 1 and 2 have remakes that are more readily available than the original Yakuza 1 and 2 on the PS2. Yakuza 3 on the other hand is pretty easy to get now via the remastered collection, which is how I also played Yakuza 3. So I think by default, Yakuza 3 is probably going to be people's least favorite, just because you can really feel how dated it is if you play the more recent Yakuza games or even Judgment. You can especially feel it in the combat system, with it feeling stiffer compared to the other games in the series. Not to mention that the combat system itself also doesn't have as much variety as some of the other games in terms of movesets, considering that Kiryu only has his iconic dragon style moveset with a few other extras you learn from Common Key and Revelations. You don't get any other movesets, unlike in Yakuza 4 and onward. But even so, I wouldn't say the combat in Yakuza 3 is bad. I like it still, even with how basic it is compared to the other Yakuza games I played. Kiryu Dragon style fighting form is still a cool moveset I think, with the moves he has within that fighting style still feeling pretty okay to pull off. And there is still a good amount of variety of heat moves in this game that are gratifying. Heck, I think the game introduces like one of the most badass and anime heat moves in the series via Essence of Terror. I think that is still one of my favorite heat moves to do in the series, and the revelation that led you to learning that move is pretty damn awesome. Speaking of revelations, I like the revelation system Yakuza 3 has. I think it's pretty awesome how you can just walk around and go to certain points of interest in Komorocho and Okinawa, and then see a bizarre event that leads you to learning a new move. I think that's a fun way to learn new moves, while also encouraging you to partake in exploring the city more. So bravo on that. Now, this might not be a popular opinion to have, but I also didn't mind the orphanage scenes in the game. I don't know, I thought it was awesome to see Kiryu acting like a father figure to these kids and caring for them and figuring out ways to help them with their issues, like a good dad would. And I think it's a good progression for his character considering how he was an orphan himself, and how his own father figure, Shintaro Kazuma, opened up an orphanage as well, so him opening Morning Glory and taking these orphans under his care made sense, and was a good step forward considering he was done with the Yakuza life, done with the Tojo clan too. Shame that no matter how much he wants to be done with the Yakuza life keeps on coming back to him. But that's Kiryu life in a nutshell for the Yakuza games really. I also think the kids are likable still. They're good natured, but they also have their own uncertainties and sometimes they bicker, with you clearly seeing how they need someone like Kiryu in their life. But I do like how they do come together as a family. The Ryudo family was also pretty likable as well. I like how they're shown to be the smaller but neighborhood friendly Yakuza family, with you seeing how they know everyone in Okinawa familiarly, and even help out with the neighborhood. It's a nice change of pace from the Tojo and Omi. As for the other stuff I like, Mine is a good foil to Kiryu I think, in terms of being someone who also grew up as an orphan after his own father passed away at a young age. But you can see Mine grew up to have a totally different ideology and desires from Kiryu, which I think is a pretty decent foil. So, as for the other stuff, I guess I'll go over the parts I found okay. Okinawa itself as a city was fine. I like that it gave off a different vibe from Komorocho, with it being more tropical and giving off that countryside vibe, but it overall didn't give me much of an impression, especially with how small it is. The sub-stories in this game was fine, with the standout sub-story in this game being that creepy couple sub-story, which is technically a sub-story that continued from the first Yakuza game, which was neat. The murder mystery in Cafe Alps was also cool. And then there's only 3 parts of the game that I actively dislike. Firstly, enemies in this game block a lot. By a lot, I mean a lot. Even the random mooks, which make the fight feel very annoying to go through and last longer than they should, and it just gets to the point that random fights just feel more tedious than they are difficult. And this is especially true when you go against a boss in this game. Man, are the boss fights not fun in this game with how much they block. It comes to the point where you pretty much have to do a specific move over and over again in order to chip the boss health down to 0. And I also found that heat moves feels pretty weak to use against the boss, with like, they don't really do that much damage in this game for some reason. At least that's my opinion on playing the game on hard mode. Luckily I never found this problem to surface again in the other Yakuza games, so that's good. I also found the overlying story revolving around the new military base, the new military expansion bill, Black Monday, the land around Morning Glory, all of that seems to be kinda dull. I feel like the Black Monday plotline was a way to raise the stakes from the last game, but it kind of falls flat since A, most of the information given to you about Black Monday is done in one scene. That's pretty much an exposition dump, without the game naturally building up to that plotline, so it's kind of hard to care about it given how abrupt the information is given to you. And B, there's really no emotional or personal connection for the player to latch onto in terms of this plotline, since Black Monday doesn't really have a connection to Kiryu. The only actual character that represents Black Monday is also a character that Kiryu can't communicate with, due to how the guy only speaks English. So there's no interesting character dynamic between Richardson and Kiryu. Richardson and Black Friday in general also barely have any presence in the game, since they only show up once before the exposition scene that explains Black Monday. The Black Monday plotline overall is just whatever to me as a result. Well, that's my overall thoughts on Yakuza 3. Overall, probably the weakest game in the HD collection, but there's still good stuff in there. Moving on to Yakuza 4. Oh boy, Yakuza 4. I feel like this is a pretty special title in the Yakuza series. For one, I think it's the first mainline title in the series that gets you to play as another main character, outside of Kiryu, with the game introducing not one, not two, but 3 new characters to the series. 2 of which have become fan favorites, or at least well liked in the fan base. At least from what I've understood. Namely Akiyama and Saejima, so that's pretty significant, especially since they pretty much become constant characters in future Yakuza games. Well, most of them at least. I also really like Akiyama and Saejima personally. I think they're great characters. Akiyama I think is great and a good change of pace compared to Kiryu, with Akiyama being this suave, more cool-headed individual, with being really fun to see how he handles the various hairy situations that the game throws at him in both the story and sub-stories. I also think his backstory behind creating Sky Finances and how it ties to his past as a bum-turned-billionaire to be pretty compelling, especially you seeing why his loan policies are the way that they are and why he conducts his tests on his clients is his own way of helping people that was in the same state that he was in, to help people that got the raw end of a deal and to provide them the opportunity and tools to turn their own life around, like how he was able to turn his own life around to do his own hard work and how a miracle happened that allowed him to gather the funds he needed to become as rich as he is today. Keyword though being turning their own life around, since he's not a charity. He just gives the people the tools they need to succeed, and if he thinks you're not going to have the resolve to put in that work, he'll cut you loose, which I think is fair and smart. I think all of this makes him pretty damn likable, and Akiyama is just great in this game. Now as for Saejima, I would say he is a character with a lot of heart in the game. I even say that he's one of the emotional cores in the narrative, at least to me. Now he is a pretty simple character, a rough and tumble, blunt and strong-willed individual with a lot of heart and is a loyal and well-meaning guy. Loyal to the point where he's willing to steel himself and take a dark step if it's for the people he respects, even if it hurts them, which it does, with you seeing how that dark deed he supposedly did still haunts him even to the present day. That plot point is actually one of my favorite scenes in the Yakuza series, and it really endeared me to Saejima. It also helps that his overall personality is still likable to me, with him being a blunt guy that's rough around the edges and have well-meaning intentions behind his rough actions. So yeah, those 2 characters are great additions to the Yakuza series. As for the other 2, well, Kiryu is as good as ever, with it being pretty cool to see how the game props up his legend status, with how you see the other characters in the story casually mentioning him as this big figure in the Yakuza world, with it being pretty well earned given what Kiryu has done in the past games, as well as the shit he's been through. I also like how he has this wiser presence to him in the story as well, which again feels pretty well earned given what he's been through. And the game also doesn't take it too far. But I will say that I do think that he's kinda shoehorned into the story in terms of why he's involved into the latest Yakuza conspiracy. And then there's Tanemura. He's okay. It was a bit interesting to play as a cop and what appeared to be a sleazy cop at first, but I don't think he's all that interesting once you pull back the facade of him being a sleazy cop, but not actually. With that said, I do think Tanemura part of the story is where the more interesting parts of the plot comes in, and I do think his exchange with Suguchi is really interesting, And honestly speaking, Saguchi is probably the best antagonist in the game. I know that's not a high bar in this game since the antagonists are pretty weak in Yakuza 4, but I do think Saguchi is still an effective character. I actually felt for the man where you see at the end where he's beaten and revealing everything of how he has suffered in his own way of being a fake cop and of being a pawn of this conspiracy that has plagued our main characters, and how in the end, Saguchi acknowledges Tonomura as being one of the few good cops he's seen in his time in the force as a fake cop. That last exchange overall made me like Saguchi in his antagonistic role, so kudos. Overall, character-wise, at least the main characters, I think the game does pretty well. I think this opinion also translates to what I think of each character's gameplay style. That's to say that I think most of them are fun. Akiyama, Kiryu, and Saejima I think have fighting styles that are fun to play around with the game doing a pretty good job of making each character feel distinct. Whether that be kicking enemies to submission as Akiyama, downing punks with Kiryu with his usual dragon style moveset, which is this balanced style of punches and kicks to it that has the street fighting feeling to it, or just bodying people with Saejima, who's this tank of a man who's able to punch through enemy attacks with his strong strikes if you play him right. The only character that's not fun, in my opinion, is, as you guessed it, Tonomura, whose whole gimmick is to have a guard mechanic of sorts, but I never found that mechanic all that useful or fun in this game. But I will say that Tonomura having a hit action as combo enders is pretty cool. His normal moveset though is pretty meh. Also, he has the worst final boss out of the 4. Just 2 words! Jingo 2.0! Actually, it might be worse than that, but yeah. As far as the gameplay concerning these characters outside combat, I think it's mostly okay. Emphasis on the word most. Each character have their own unique set of side quests and personal trainer characters like Kamiki, as well as unique elements in the overworld that makes playing through each character feel unique in some regards. For Tonomura, it's being a cop, with there being various prompts that tell you where and when a crime is taking place, and then you going there to stop it. Akiyama is the hostess club, which you should probably skip since it's pretty damn boring. And then there's Saejima. Now he does have his own minigame like the others, in terms of a dojo training simulator kind of. But then there's an interesting spin on how he traverses Komorocho, with how he's on the lam and how there are various cops patrolling around Komorocho, which results in you having to traverse the city in a way that gets you to try to avoid them, which gets you to use the new roof and underground areas of Komorocho. And then with Kiryu, it's I can't really remember if he has a unique overworld element, but he does have a good amount of sub-stories that deals with the various no good punks that he dealt back in Yakuza 1 and 2 and encountering them in this game, and seeing how they have turned their life around, which is pretty cool I think. Now, not all of these unique elements are fun, some I even say are pretty damn annoying to deal with, like with Saejima having to avoid the cops. Yeah, it fits the story, but it makes traverse much more time consuming and frustrating. But generally speaking, I think the game does a pretty good job of making each character to be distinctive when you're playing as them when you're traversing through Komorocho. And I do think there are some really neat ideas in here, like Tonomura cop mechanics. As for the story, I think for most of the game, I think the story is rather good. Heck, I think Yakuza 4 has some of the best moments of the series for me. It does a fantastic job of introducing 3 new characters, does a good job making us care for them, and the plot revolving around the main conspiracy is interesting enough for the most part. But at the same time, I also think that Yakuza 4 drops the ball on the plot during the ending part of the game. It drops it so hard that I have to say that while Yakuza 4 has one of the best moments in the series for me, it also got one of the most questionably stupid moments in the series for me. And no, I don't mean the rubber bullets part. Okay, I take issue when they use it for the second time in the plot, but I didn't mind it the first time it was used. I also don't think the reveal takes away from a certain character's big moment in the story, considering what his intentions were in the moment of the crime, and how he didn't have any knowledge of the conspiracy that was taking place. I know I'm being incredibly vague, but people who play the game know who I'm talking about and know what moment I'm talking about. I know this is probably not the most popular opinion, but it is what it is. No, the stupid moments I'm talking about is the ending parts where the best idea our main man could think of to lure the multiple major antagonists of the game is to take the massive font that Akiyama has and put it on the rooftop of the Millennium Tower and just hope they take the bait. Yeah, just hope that they take the bait. That's it. Man, talk about a rush ending. Let's also not forget how the way that Akiyama money gets stolen in the first place is done in the most stupid of ways possible. I think that's like one of the stupidest moments in a Yakuza game for me. Forget about rubber bullets. The way that Akiyama's money gets stolen, that's the truly stupid part in this game's story. I also think that the antagonists of this game is incredibly weak. Most of them are either one-dimensional, greedy or power-hungry antagonists with no depth, or they barely have any screen time. The only good antagonist in the game I feel is Suguchi, and I already said my part in it. But yeah, that's my take on Yakuza 4. Overall, a pretty good game series that have a lot of highs, but also a few lows. And those lows, man, did they get low. But this game also has the most Chad ways to do Revelation, so all is forgiven.
"実は皆さんにどうしても話しておかなければならないことがあります。今、私がこのステージの上に立てているのは決して自分一人の力ではありません。
Oh boy, Yakuza 5. Out of all the Yakuza games that I've played, I'd probably say this game is perhaps the most divisive in the series. At least in terms of mainline games. And after playing it, I can sorta see why. Firstly, Yakuza 5 is chock full of content. Out of all the games in the Yakuza collection, this game is definitely gonna last you the longest, even if you're just playing for the main story. To give you guys a point of reference, my usual play time in each Yakuza game is generally around 20 to 30 hours. Yakuza 5? It took me around 60 hours. Not the longest thing I played, I mean, I've played Persona games before, but Yakuza 5 is twice as long as a normal Yakuza game. This game is just brimming with content. Let me go through the actual content this game has to give you guys how much stuff is in this game. Firstly, Yakuza 5 has 5 main characters, though 2 share a story with each other. Those characters are Kiryu, Saejima, Haruka, Akiyama, and a new character called Shinada. Each of these main characters got their sub-stories as well as an extensive minigame dedicated to them, such as with Kiryu being a taxi driver, Saejima hunting, Shinada with his baseball stuff. But the minigame that's probably gonna stand out the most is probably Haruka's, since her minigame and overall gameplay style is the most different gameplay style ever introduced in a Yakuza game, even to this day. Now, if you were expecting Haruka to fight in this game, you're gonna be sadly disappointed. Most of the fighting in her story is relegated to Akiyama, but that's cool. I love Akiyama and his fighting style. But I digress. Haruka's gameplay style is based around dancing, with you essentially having to play a rhythm game with her, since she's striving to be an idol in this game. And if you think that's the only idol thing you do with her, you'd be mistaken, since there are various optional minigames dedicated to Haruka being an idol, such as attending a handshake event, an autograph signing, participating in a talk show, participating in what I think is a commercial, with the camera just recording her running for some reason, and the list goes on. Not to mention she also has her own personal trainer character like the rest of the cast, with Haruka learning abilities that allow her to perform better in the main rhythm game. As you can see, they pull out all the stops to make you feel like an idol in this game when you're playing as Haruka, and it's an experience alright. As for the other personal minigames, I said they're very in-depth as well. Not as much as Haruka's, but enough that if you were planning to fully complete those minigames, it'll probably last you a few hours. The only exception is Akiyama, in which he doesn't have a personal minigame. But he pretty much shares the spotlight with Haruka in this game, to some regards. But there is some content to do with him since the fighting parts of Haruka's story is relegated to Akiyama, as well as how he also got a fair share of self-stories. Not to mention that you can also do dance battles with him, so yeah, there's content to do with Akiyama, and they're pretty neat stuff to do as well. And on top of all of this content that I just described, you also got a very extensive story in this game, that revolves around the themes and concepts of dreams with each of these characters. Did I also mention that they also have their own city to traverse in, with the Saijima and Shinada sections taking place in totally new cities? So suffice to say that this game is packed with content to do. Packed. To the point that Yakuza 5 can feel somewhat bloated, with there being a few elements that are executed pretty poorly in this game. I feel this bloated aspect is especially felt in the main story of Yakuza 5. When you get down to it, I think only 3 characters are really needed to tell the type of story that Yakuza 5 is trying to tell. That is to say Kiryu, Haruka, and the newcomer Shinada, at least in terms of main characters. Their story emphasizes the best at what the main themes and messages are in Yakuza 5. That is to say the themes of dreams, of striving toward your dream, and making the sacrifices needed to reach it, of seeing how the cost of that sacrifice affect not only the person striving toward their dream, but also their loved ones, of unfulfilled dreams and how they can drive a person or do the opposite, and most importantly of how you can still have something important to you remaining even if you don't have that dream fulfilled, and how even that dream might not even be worth the cost it requires, and how you can still find happiness even if you don't fulfill that one dream. I think Haruka, Shinada, and Kiryu's stories do a good job making an engaging story out of those themes, especially in regards to Haruka and Shinada characters. I personally think those 2 stories are the most engaging in the game and even heartfelt. Shinada I especially like. I feel like he's the closest protagonist in the series that feels most like a normal guy, albeit a chill normal guy who's good at fighting somewhat but still normal. Has certain vices you'll expect from a normal guy. He'll still get intimidated if he's in a situation that's exceedingly dangerous for him. Heck, he'll even break down in the situation when you're talking to. But despite those elements, you can clearly see that he's still a good man at heart, with him still willing to help people, take responsibility, and how he will defuse the situation so that no one will get hurt, even if he's the one no longer in any danger. He's honestly kinda refreshing to have in a Yakuza game, where the protagonists of past games have been these extraordinary people when you get down to it. Shinada doesn't have that extraordinary vibe to him. He's just a normal guy who's down on his luck and have been scarred by the fact that his one dream had been dashed. Now he's just living day by day in poverty. Well, essentially. And you really feel for the guy when you go through the story to see how much baseball meant to him and how it still pains him how he can't play anymore professionally due to a Yakuza plot that rigged the game that ruined his career. But to also see that despite all the hardships and how he can't play professionally anymore, he still has a place to return to at the end of it all. Shinada overall is just a pretty well done character, I feel, and is honestly probably my favorite character in the game. Haruka and Kiryu I also think is well done. I think it was cool to see Haruka earnestly working hard toward making her idol dream come true, and her relationship with Park is interesting, as they develop a sort of mother-daughter relationship, and see how Park herself is a rather intriguing character. Not likable, especially after what she made Kiryu do, but intriguing in terms of how driven of a character she is, to see how determined she was in her youth to chase her dream, and see the sacrifices she's taken, and how that failure to achieve her dream drives her now, to try to make Haruka dreams come true. Park's character and history is not only interesting on their own, but it is interesting in relation to Haruka and her journey to try to achieve her dream. As for Kiryu, I feel like he's handled pretty okay. He's certainly the most depressed here in the series. It's here where you do feel that no matter how much he tries to escape the Yakuza life will always mark him. And it's pretty sad to see him like this, to see how he had to leave Morning Glory due to his past ties to the Yakuza, to see how miserable he is in a life without caring for his kids back in Morning Glory, and to see how done he is with the Yakuza, but he keeps getting dragged back. But honestly, while it's sad to see, it's still an interesting direction to take Kiryu's story, and see where he ends up at the end of the game. But so far, it seems like I'm pretty positive about the story. Yeah, the story and dialogue can be pretty corny, but I enjoyed it. So what's the problem? It's the fact that this is not the only story in this game. There's also the story of how the Tojo clan is gathering up various Yakuza games throughout the country, of how Majima is missing and then figuring out what's happening on that side, how there's a big war that's coming between the Tojo and Omi, again, and so on. The fact that there's 2 big stories in Yakuza 5 is the reason why it feels so bloated. That and the fact that one of the stories feel pretty underdeveloped compared to the main one. Now, do I like certain parts of the story that involve the big Yakuza clans? Yeah, I think Watase is cool. I think there are some pretty cool scenes with Saitama, but I do think there are parts of the game that feels pretty underwhelming in regards to that plotline. The big bad for one is probably the worst antagonist in the series. They also kind of pull what they did at the end of Yakuza 4 and Yakuza 5 in terms of trying to figure out a plotline to wrap everything up, but do it in a very stupid way. Funny enough, it's the same kind of plotline that did in Yakuza 4 in terms of like, how do we lure out the masterminds behind the conspiracies? But instead of trying to lure them out with money in Yakuza 4, in Yakuza 5, let's just beat each other up and hope that the mastermind comes out. Which is a really stupid plan. What? Yeah. Luckily, I think the hardcore ending in the final Shinada scene kinda saves it, but man is the story really rough overall. As for the overall gameplay, I think I liked it well enough. Kiryu Akiyama's Saitama is still a lot of fun to play as in regards to the combat styles. Shinada is sort of interesting with how his fighting style revolves around weapons, and I think the hardcore rhythm-based dancing gameplay is a nice change of pace. I at least had a lot of fun playing through the hardcore parts, and like I said before, the game excels in giving you lots of content to do, and it is fortunate that that content is pretty varied. With that said, I do have one contention with the overall gameplay. That is to say, Saitama sections are probably the worst in the game. It has the worst city to traverse through as well as the worst personal minigame, i.e. hunting. Which is a shame since I do think he plays better in Yakuza 5 in regards to his very heavy combat style. Shinada's combat style also feels pretty weak I think compared to the others, but I got used to him eventually. I do think his playstyle is interesting, but I just wish it didn't feel as weak as it did. The rest of the cities you traverse through and the various minigames you play I think is fine. No complaints over there. Overall, Yakuza 5 is possibly a game that's too big for its own good, and I can understand why it's so divisive, but I still like it and I do think it's still got some really strong elements as a Yakuza game.
またこの町に帰ってきちまったか。
Now we get down to the game that is supposed to conclude Kiryu's story, the grand finale to the turbulent life that is Kiryu Kazuma, a final send-off to the legendary Dragon of Dojima. And as a conclusion to Kiryu's story arc, I think it does a pretty good job in some regards. In others not so much, but I get back to that in a bit. I think the first thing of note in Yakuza 6 is that this is where the Dragon engine first premiered. And you can really tell that when you're playing through the game. For one, the combat is totally revamped, the style system from Yakuza 0 being gone, and there just not being as many options and variety as before. Not to add in how there's a different experience point system, and how you don't even have full access to Komonrocho in Yakuza 6, with certain parts of the city being blocked off indefinitely. And you can see why people regard Yakuza 6 as a tech demo for the Dragon engine just due to how underdeveloped certain parts of the games are. Now, do I think that personally? No. I think there's still enough going in the game that it doesn't feel like a tech demo, at least to me, but it does feel somewhat lacking in overall content, at least in terms of number of Yakuza games. Add in how this game has a new combat system that's its own thing rather than building up for the mechanics from Yakuza 3 through 5 and 0, and not to mention that Kiwami 2 and Judgment build upon the Dragon engine further, which makes this game feel even more limiting in retrospective, and I can understand why people feel like Yakuza 6 is a tech demo. But I still think there's enough content in the game, at least compared to other games in the market. So now that part of the discussion is done, what do I think of the game itself? Well, I should start off with the parts that I do like. I guess I should get the obvious thing out of the way. The game looks really good. Both Komorocho and Onimichi looks great, with Onimichi doing a great job of giving off that small town vibe, which is a good contrast to the bustling Komorocho. Character models look absolutely fantastic, and the animation in the game is pretty good, I think. I especially think they do a great job of making Kiryu punches feel as impactful as they are. I think this game and Kiwami 2 does a great job of selling just how powerful Kiryu is thanks to both the animation work and the combat mechanics. Most notably that little QTE moment you get where you land a strong hit on an enemy while in ultimate heat mode. The second thing I like, and this is probably not intentional on the devs part, but it's the ragdoll physics in this game. It's just so much fun to watch. You see how you can send enemies flying with your punches and kicks when you're playing as Kiryu? It's just awesome. And when it happens to Kiryu too, it's equally as funny. And that's not to mention the mayhem that happens when you interact with an item in the game and they go flying everywhere due to the ragdoll physics in this game. It's just so entertaining. The combat is also pretty okay. Now, I don't remember much of the combat system intricacies besides it not having as many options and variety as 0 and 5, but I think it does a really good job of displaying the weight and power of Kiryu attacks, which at least make the combat feel impactful. And I do think Extreme Heat Mode is neat as a super mode. Now, Heat Mode has been in other games, but I do think this game put more emphasis on it. And for the most part, I like it. You feel like a juggernaut when it activates, and it's really satisfying to land blows in this mode. At least, I think so. It's not my favorite combat system, but it's still fun throughout the duration of the game. Or at least, it's passable. Now, if the game was as long as Yakuza 5, I probably would get bored with it with how there's not as many options, variety, and heat moves. But luckily, Yakuza 6 isn't as long as Yakuza 5, or even Yakuza 0, so combat doesn't overstay its welcome. Another thing I find neat is probably how seamless Komorocho and Onimichi is, in terms of overworld design, with the various shops that are littered throughout these cities now being part of the overworld itself, rather than being in their own separate instances. Now, future Yakuza type games will have this sort of feature moving on, and it isn't even all that unique in the grand scheme of things, but it's still pretty nice to see how seamless the world is. And it's neat that this is the first Yakuza game to do this sort of thing. As for the story, I liked it. I think the plot revolving around the power struggle between the Tojo, the Yomai Alliance, the Sayo Triad, and even the resurged Jingwang Mafia is interesting. And it was fascinating to figure out how Haruka's baby factored in this mayhem, since it seems some of the factions are after the baby. Oh yeah, Haruka has a child, so that's a bombshell, with parts of the story revolving around finding out who the child father is, since that's most likely the reason why these different crime organizations are after Haruka's child. The Hirase family I thought was really likable. They sort of reminded me of the Ryudo family from Yakuza 3, in terms of emitting that neighborhood-friendly Yakuza group vibe. I also think the build-up to finding out what the big secret the Yomai Alliance and Sayo Triad is protecting is really good. Not so much the secret itself, since I don't think it leaves much of an impact, but the build-up to it is so good. And overall, I think Yakuza 6 is an okay conclusion for Kiryu's arc. It made sense why Kiryu did what he did at the end, especially with how much the Yakuza life basically followed him everywhere no matter how much he tried to distance himself from it. I do think it's kind of odd who Kiryu sent his final letter to in the end, but I was still satisfied. What I don't like about the story though is probably how they handled Haruka. Now, I don't mind Haruka having a baby, like some people. And I also don't mind who the father was, since I do think Haruka's father is a good guy and is trying to be a good father. Granted, he needed talking to from Kiryu and still went in the wrong direction in order to protect his child, but he was still a good guy from heart. And there was some effective drama revolving around that plot point. What I do mind though, is how absent Haruka is in this story. Especially in this story whose themes revolve around parents and their relationship with their child. To have Haruka, who's essentially Kiryu's daughter, absent in most of the plot is mind-boggling and is a huge waste of opportunity. Also don't like how Daigo, Majima, and Saejima are absent too, but Haruka being absent for a good amount of the story probably stings the most. Well, that's my thoughts on Yakuza 6. Overall, I think it's a pretty okay game. Not the best game in the series. Not horrible, but I still liked it. It also has Korean Virgil, which is really cool, and a step up in terms of antagonistic roles compared to Yakuza 5 and Yakuza 4.
Stop! Don't open it!
Hey, how's it going?
Now we get to the latest Yakuza game in the series, Yakuza 7. If Yakuza 6 was supposed to be a conclusion of sorts, Yakuza 7 can be seen as a new beginning for the series. New protagonists, new battle system that's turn-based by the way, they're bringing an actual party system rather than playing as different characters, new city, though we get to explore Komurocho and Osaka for a bit, more RPG elements that are clearly inspired from other well-known RPGs, and so on. So as you can see, there are a lot of things in this game that are unique. But despite that, this game still feels Yakuza at its core. They just deliver the Yakuza experience in a somewhat different format. You still get the crime drama aspect, and the characters still feel very Yakuza. You still got the over-the-top heat actions, heck they're even more over-the-top in this game. You still got the densely packed cities that are filled with personality, you still got shit tons of minigames to indulge in, and you still got wholesome sub-stories. This is still very much a Yakuza game, and as the Yakuza experience itself, Yakuza 7 is really amazing. The story is great for one. Now I don't want to give too much away since Yakuza 7 is the latest game in the series to come out, in comparison to the other games I talk about in this list, but I do think Yakuza 7 got perhaps one of the most emotionally charged story experiences that came out in 2020 in regards to gaming. Now the crime drama aspect of the game of you figuring out why Ichiban was dumped in the city of Yokohama, and why he got left with a fake bill, and how it all tied to this grand plan that involves the Agent 3, the All Might Alliance, and the Tojo, all of that is incredibly gripping and interesting. But I think the true heart of the story really does belong to the protagonist of the game, namely to Ichiban, which I think is a fantastic protagonist. This story is very much Ichiban's journey of starting out at rock bottom and seeing him make the best of his situation as he gets slowly drawn to the various conspiracies that both involve the Agent 3 as well as the Tojo and All Might Alliance. Of seeing him get put through the ringer and witnessing if he's still able to remain as he is, to still be able to keep his strong sense of family and justice. Ichiban to me is the epitome of the lovable idiot. Fiercely loyal, brash, hot-headed, not that smart, but incredibly well-meaning, passionate, and even wholesome at times. He's an incredibly relatable and likable character, wholly different from Kiryu in many ways, but still an incredibly charming protagonist. The other characters are great too. The writing overall is just top-notch in the game and is on par with Yakuza 0, which is a pretty high bar to reach in the series. I guess one more thing to mention before I move on is that I really love how the game takes advantage of the fact that we have a party system in this Yakuza game, and how there's more group interaction in this game as a result. Not only in the story, but they also have nice little skits that happen when you're wandering around town or eating at a restaurant. It makes the group feel more alive or more tight-knit, which I really appreciate. Also like how we have a sort of social link mechanic in this game, with each character having their own interesting and extensive story tied to an infection mechanic, with you getting some really good one-on-one interactions between each bond and each different party member in these segments. It's overall pretty cool. As for the presentation, it's top-notch as usual. Now I think Yakuza games looks pretty good usually, especially in the cutscenes department, but I have to say that the cutscene quality in this game is something else. I mean, just look at the bread animation that happens in one of the beginning cutscenes in the game. It's just nuts! And the facial animation in this game is just amazing. The cutscenes are overall pretty great, and the overall graphic engine looks really nice. Music is also great in Yakuza 7. Now it does reuse some tracks from previous Yakuza games, but I do think the original tracks that are here are really good, especially the battle and boss themes. They slap so hard. It just has this high energy that is addictive to hear, that has this really techno and even dubstep feel to it, I think. I'm not a music guy, so this is just my gut feeling, and I might be describing it wrong, but regardless, I think it sounds amazing. It actually reminded me of the Judgment soundtrack in terms of overall vibe and motif, which is great, since that game also has a kick-ass soundtrack. The minigames? All freaking fantastic. I personally think Yakuza 7 is probably the series' strongest in terms of minigame selection and quality. Dragon Kart, can collection, business management, the usual casino games and mahjong and so on, they're all pretty fun and interesting to go through. One thing I love about the business management game is that you can actually get an optional party member for it. A good party member too. That's really rad. You don't see many games doing something like this, especially nowadays. So it's pretty cool to see Yakuza 7 giving a totally optional party member through a minigame. Now for the combat of Yakuza 7. I would say that Yakuza 7's turn-based combat is fun. Now I've heard people compare the combat system to Persona, but I don't think they have much in common aside from the UI, at least in terms of mechanics. Now mechanic-wise, I would say it's pretty much more of a standard turn-based combat system. The combat in this game isn't based around hitting weaknesses like the modern Persona games. Yeah, hitting weaknesses does do more damage, and you want to do that, but it actually doesn't give you more mechanical options like in Persona 3, 4, and 5. And Yakuza 7 overall isn't based around that concept. So yeah, Yakuza 7 is much more traditional in regards to its combat system. But with that said, I do like it. I do think it's neat how they incorporate various mechanics from the action-based Yakuza games, like the QTEs, or how you can stop an enemy for extra damage if you normal attack them while they're knocked down. I think those elements give the combat some more extra oomph, and it does feel satisfying to pull off those QTE and stomps for the extra damage. But more so the QTE. There are also a lot of cool classes you can play with, a lot of over-the-top and bombastic heat actions to do, awesome summons to use, and overall, the combat system has a lot of options and cool abilities you can try out, which is pretty rad. It's especially fun to see the heat actions in this game, especially with how over the top they are. There are some seriously ridiculously awesome heat action in this game. I mean, you got one where you're firing a satellite laser, one where you have support from a SWAT team, one where you play Russian roulette with the enemies, one where you summon a swarm of pigeons to attack your enemies. It's just crazy, man. And the summons are just as ridiculously awesome as the heat actions. The special attacks in this game are just so damn cool to watch. Now, there are some problems I have with the overline combat. I think the lack of an enemy list when you're selecting which enemy to target is pretty damn frustrating. Especially when you're trying to hit a down enemy, but can't due to how there isn't a reliable and fast way to target a specific enemy with the current targeting system the game uses. I also think it's kinda odd how there isn't a movement option in the combat system. Like, your character automatically moves throughout the field, but you can't actually order a character to move to a specific point on that field. I find that odd since environmental triggers are a thing in this game, and you would think having a movement option would complement that mechanic since it allows you to actually use those environmental triggers to your advantage and allow the environment to actually be a tangible factor in this game. But as it is, it's pretty random when you see a character pick up a cone or bicycle to wall up on an enemy since you literally can't move near a cone and then select attack to use that cone. You pretty much just have to hope that your character happens to be near an object in the environment to be able to use it. For the most part, with how it's done, environmental factors aren't even in consideration when you're playing through this game's combat system. Like, it's nice when it happens, but it's not a viable option for you to use with how random it is. Now, to be fair, this isn't actually a problem since the attacks you get from these interactions doesn't actually change the battle much, unlike the other Yakuza games. They're pretty much just a normal attack, but with a different animation. Well, maybe except for the bicycle that has more range, so you can hit multiple enemies with it, maybe. But I still find it weird since it's a Yakuza game, and the past Yakuza games were really good in weaving the environment into the core gameplay and having it actually matter. whether that be picking up a weapon on the ground and using it against the enemy, or having heat actions that are tied to how you're positioned within the environment. You always felt that the environment mattered in the Yakuza games. So you would expect that it would matter more in this game's combat system, but not so much. Maybe this is a huge nitpick, but it is something I noticed when I was playing through the game. I'm just saying that if the environmental triggers mattered in this game's combat system, and you had a system that allowed you to take advantage of it consistently, I think the game would be even more fun, but that just might be me. I'm also not a fan of how grindy the game can be in terms of how you pretty much have to grind when you want to try out a new class. Not to mention, it is really annoying with how you have to go back to the job center to change jobs in this game, rather than just being able to change jobs in the menu. And the AI pathfinding isn't the best. Let's just leave it at that, since it's really questionable. But despite those issues, I really like the game's combat system. It is fun to play through. Is it the best combat system in the series? No. And I think it does need more refinement. But as it is, it's a fun romp. And overall, I think the game's quality is just phenomenal. In fact, I say Yakuza 7 is probably one of the best Yakuza games in the series. At the very least, it's in my top 3 Yakuza games list. It's actually kind of funny to see how the concept of this game was played off as an April Fool's made into a legit Yakuza game, and the end result is nothing short of an amazing Yakuza game. Not only an amazing Yakuza game, but a Yakuza game that feels like a loving tribute to the rest of the series. What with you having past characters making an appearance in Yakuza 7, how this game strangely enough continues the storyline of the Tojo clan in its own way, how you can even summon past Yakuza characters in battle with this game version of summons, and so on. Don't get me wrong, this game is totally standalone. It's just that if you played the other Yakuza games, you'll be able to enjoy the game more as you get what things this game is referencing and paying an homage to. But that's my overall thoughts on Yakuza 7, a pretty great Yakuza game all things considered. So that's pretty much all the Yakuza games that I've experienced in 2020. Now I can probably wrap up the video, but since I gave my thoughts on Yakuza 3 through 7, I guess I should give my input on the other Yakuza games as well, since I pretty much talked about most of the series at this point. Albeit my thoughts on the remaining Yakuza games will probably be shorter since A, the length of this video is long enough as it is, and B, it's been a while since I played those games, so my memory is a bit spotty. Okay, lightning round. Yakuza 0. Probably my favorite. I think the crime drama around the empty lot was incredibly gripping. It was especially cool to see Majima's gradual transformation and see how he got his wild and balls to the wall attitude that he has at the end of the game and that is prevalent throughout the rest of the series. Kiryu and Nishiki's relationship was also done beautifully, which got me really invested in both their characters. The game did a great job of settling not only on their characters, but also on the bond of brotherhood the two had. The side characters were also really fantastic. It was really neat to see the various side characters in Yakuza 1 get more development in Yakuza 0, such as with Sarah. And then we got the combat, which was really fun, especially the different fighting styles. It was awesome how both Kiryu and Majima each had 4 different fighting styles that you can switch from, with each style having their own identity on their own, and how each got their own strengths and weaknesses. Not to mention that both Kiryu and Majima also fought really differently from each other, which made the combat feel fresh whenever the story switched between the two. And finally, the minigames were really awesome. I'd probably still say that Yakuza 7 probably has the best spread of minigames, but the minigames in Yakuza 0 was also still really good. My favorite in Yakuza 0 in terms of minigames was probably the pocket circuit. Overall, Yakuza 0, an incredible game, and probably my favorite game in the series. Either that or Yakuza 7. Yakuza Kiwami 1. It's good. I think the story is pretty interesting. I think Haruka and Kiryu's relationship was done well. The game does a really good job of making you feel for Nishiki as you witness his downward spiral to becoming the person he is in Yakuza 1. And I pretty much enjoyed the overall story. Date and the floors was also pretty good, I think. And the plot revolving around the missing 10 billion and how it correlates to Haruka, as well as the Tojo civil war that sparked due to the missing money, is generally interesting. Combat wise, it basically uses the same combat engine as Yakuza 0. So it's still enjoyable. With that said, I do think there are some mishandled ideas in the game, like the Majima Everywhere system. Now, I do like this system somewhat. I think it's fun fighting Majima, especially since you fight him in his various styles. I also think the system is an interesting way to level up a fighting style, but I think they went overboard with the system. Like, fighting Majima is fun and all, but there comes a certain point where the fun factor wears off due to you fighting him too many times. Like, it's pretty ridiculous how many times you fight him due to the system. And then there's the aura system. You know, the system where the game pretty much forces you have to hit a boss with a specific heat action within a certain style when they get down to a specific HP threshold, and if you don't, they recover HP. Yeah, not a fan of that mechanic. It can feel pretty cheap, especially you have no heat when this mechanic happens. But overall, Kiwami 1 is pretty enjoyable. Yakuza Kiwami 2. I remember liking this game a lot. I like Kiryu's and Kairu's character in this game a lot, and I think the relationship they have with each other is pretty cute. Ryuji is a pretty boss antagonist. The overall story I think is pretty enjoyable, and I like how big it felt when coming from Yakuza 1. Especially since they built up the Omi Alliance a bunch in both Yakuza 0 and 1. So to see the Omi Alliance finally playing a part in the story in 2 was really awesome. Not to mention that the Jingwang Mafia also plays a big part in the story. And you really do feel how big the story is in comparison to 1 when you see these 3 big factions clash with each other. The graphical engine Yakuza Kiwami 2 was also pretty good, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise since this game was built on the Yakuza 6 engine. The combat also has some improvements from Yakuza 6, and I think it generally plays better than Yakuza 6 in terms of overall gameplay. Now, I don't remember anything I dislike in Kiwami 2, at least not anything that especially stands out. And overall, I probably like Kiwami 2 more than Kiwami 1. And I think that's pretty much all the Yakuza games I played in 2020 and then some. Quite a lot of Yakuza games in hindsight, and I'm not sure how I did not reach burnout when I finally completed Yakuza 7. But it was still a great journey. It was incredibly interesting to both see how Kiryu's story went throughout the series, and see all the interesting characters that appeared during that storyline, as well as see the birth of a new character's storyline via Ichiban in Yakuza 7. It was a lot of fun playing through each game's combat system and to experience all the over-the-top action that came with beating down various thugs and criminals with these glorious main characters. Heck, it was just awesome seeing how the characters are able to rip their suits off their bodies with just one simple hand movement. It was just all great. I had a really good time with these games, and I hope that if you haven't tried the series out yet, that you'll give these games a shot. They're really good games and I wholly recommend them. Now, I wouldn't suggest you binge them like I did, but do try these games out. Well, that's all folks. Hope you guys enjoyed this rather random video that had a lot of fun making. And this is Peter 47890 Sirus signing off.